My NFL career was over after 3 games, and I was 2-1 as a starter because of how I dealt with a poor performance at Kansas City.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a Monster Monday presented, of course, by DraftKings. Very excited to have Ryan Leaf back on the show today. People loved when Ryan came back a couple months ago. I wanted to dive into him, though, his life, his career, a little bit deeper. We talked more about current NFL topics last time he was on. Let's find out a little bit more about his incredible football journey. Plus, there's some interesting things going on with the New England Patriots. Let's dive right into it. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
Well, I told you back in January I was going to get him back on the show because there's a lot to talk to when it comes to Ryan Leaf, a guy that, man, I was in college when he played in the Rose Bowl against Michigan and then was drafted. Ryan came out in 98. I was 2001. I still remember that draft vividly. You can check him out on social media at Ryan D. Leaf. You know, Ryan, we talked, back in January about everything that was going on at the time with Patrick Mahomes and Brock Purdy and all that. Didn't really have the time to talk about you, other than you talked about the media stuff you're doing in your businesses and moving to Connecticut and your baby, which is amazing. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper with you. And I guess I was thinking about this. Do you like talking about your journey? Because it's been a heck of a ride. Do you like it? Do you welcome it? Or does it get tiresome when people want to go through, the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys of the last, 25 years for you?
I would say this. If I didn't like who I was now, it would be very difficult. It would be very, very difficult to talk about something because it would be things that I would still resent hearing. I like who I am. I like who I see in the mirror, and that was not always the case. So I also know, and there's a reason why I pick and choose when I do things like this. You have a big following on your podcast, and there's definitely individuals out there that follow you and that are still struggling, that are dealing with things, whether that's mental health wise or substance use disorders, that simply need some hope. And you may just need that much hope. And you wouldn't believe over the years my sharing just my story. It's nothing unique, okay? There's some unique qualities of it, former NFL player and all of that, but my life is just like anybody else's. It was just very public, okay? So the way my mentors and I have discussed the fact that my, crash and burn was incredibly public, and my recovery has to be even louder. And that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to be influential and being a part of other people's lives who need some hope. And by doing that, it's never about me. I'm not telling you the story of my life here to say, hey, everybody, look at me. Look how great I'm doing. It has nothing to do with me. It has zero to do with me. It has everything to do with the individual that still struggles and just needs to hear a little hope just to keep getting them through and getting them back up.
Let's start with that, because it's been so long now, man, that I'd be lying if I said I remembered all the peaks and valleys. You know what I mean? I remember certain TV clips, and I remember, some substance issues and stuff like that. But I guess I want to go back. You're at Washington State. You have an awesome career, an incredible year. You play in the Rose Bowl. There's all the debate about who should be drafted first, you or Peyton Manning. I guess my question is, did you have any issues, in hindsight now, any of the demons that affected you later on in life, were any of them already present at Washington State? Or did they only come about or come to the surface as a result of the pressure of being the number 2 overall pick and the face of the franchise in the NFL draft and all that stuff?
Well, I think all that exacerbated whatever was underlying, mental health disorders. unless you're diagnosed or are actively trying to treat something, you have no idea what's going on. And I was living with narcissistic personality disorder. I was dealing with some depression and social anxiety for sure. So those are the three things that lived there. Substance use was never an issue. I didn't have my first drink until I was 18. The only drug I've ever taken in my life is a prescription painkiller that was prescribed to me for the first time by a doctor. So, like, those were not issues. My first drug of choice was competition. I wanted to compete, and I wanted to beat everybody and anybody, and that's why I was so successful. I'm from Great Falls, Montana, okay? There's only been one Montanan ever who's been drafted in the first round in the NFL draft, and you're looking at him, okay? It's never happened. So there's actually three of them in the Manning family, and only one in Montana history. So it just doesn't happen. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was never supposed to happen. So when I got to that place, money changed me. All the resentment that I had from all the people where you've seen others use it as a chip on their shoulder to help move them forward, it had a very negative and opposite effect for me, especially because of how humiliated and embarrassed I was by my third start overall. It was the worst football game I'd ever played in my life, and it was how I reacted to it. My NFL career was over after 3 games, and I was 2-1 as a starter because of how I dealt with a poor performance at Kansas City. It was a horrible weather game. I had been in the hospital all week with a staph infection. I tried to play. It was a terrible stat line. It's a joke of a stat line, and it's not about how I performed, because I had won my first 2 weeks when I beat the likes of Doug Flutie and the Bills, and then went on the road and beat Steve McNair and the Titans. And so everything was there for the taking. And I went out and performed incredibly bad in an environment that I probably shouldn't have played in, but I did. And it wasn't about how I played. It's about how I reacted to it. And I have never been good at dealing with failure, though I had failed so many times in my life. But in that instance, I can honestly say that my career ended. I would go on and play for, 4 years in the NFL, but my career ended after 3 years because of how I dealt with a situation. And that was just exacerbated by all the things that come with being a franchise quarterback and not being able to deal with criticism. Expectations were higher from me than anybody. Like, the fact that I wasn't a successful NFL quarterback is more disappointing to me than anybody out there that was a fan of mine or rooted for me or thought of that I would do this, that, and the other. So, don't ever give me this swill about how, it wasn't important to me. It was every bit as important to me, and it was one of the things that carried me down that rabbit hole to a place where I just wanted to end it all because I couldn't be successful as an NFL quarterback, which is absurd, but it is. It's an institution in our country.
That is so interesting. And I think one of the things that's so interesting to me about that, Ryan, you could have had a different career after football. You know what I mean? Like, it's really interesting to me that you didn't have the career you wanted and you talked about it the way you do. You could be in sales. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm a terrible salesman. I could not be in sales.
I know, but it's just funny to me. Not funny, but you chose to run towards or back into an industry where people remember the failings, whereas I would think that most people in your situation would have run as far away from football after all this as they could. Does that make sense?
I did. I ran away forever. Football was toxic. It's the last place I wanted to be around. And what I had to come to realize is that football wasn't the problem, I was. And so I had to fix me. Football gave me everything. It gave me everything, man. I mean, it's the funnest, most amazing game that there is. I've loved it since I could hold a football in my hands, watching Terry Bradshaw and my Pittsburgh Steelers go at it. And my mom looking at me when I'd run into the kitchen and rip my Steelers helmet off and throw it into the trash because they had to punt on a series or something like that. I mean, I've loved it, and it's given me everything my whole life. Football wasn't the problem. The people who want to give me crap aren't the problem. I was the problem. And so until I fixed me, didn't matter. Wherever I went, there I was. And so that was the shift and the change. It had to be about other people. It couldn't be about me anymore. And so I went about that. And when I did that, I realized for as much as football felt like it took from me, it didn't. It actually gave me everything. And I know it really well. To get to where I got to, where you got to, we have to be so knowledgeable of the game. And the fact that people are so flippant on social media, in the public eye, everything about these guys, when there's only 27,000 of us ever to have signed NFL contracts, by the way, people, it would fit like a quarter of a stadium that's out there. How great those 27,000 players are, and you hear. And I remember hearing it when I was in prison, when guys would be sitting around watching games on Sunday, and I remember Drew Brees threw a pick or something like that, and I heard a guy, a literal 4'8" guy in a red jumpsuit sitting in a prison cell for his 8th drunk driving offense or something like that, going, "Oh man, Brees sucks." And I had a moment where I just went, okay, they're not real. Those people don't mean anything. They're not real. All those years that people telling me this, that, and the other doesn't make any sense. When I've never heard a peer of mine, like you, Ross, or anybody else, look at me and go, "Hey, you bust." We don't do that because we know how damn hard it is to get where we got. And it isn't something that's said. And so I found ownership in it. I took the power back from it. And being in the public eye and being good at my job is a way for me to do that. And so that's why I ultimately jumped back into it. And I haven't looked back since.
You know what's funny? I'm from like a upper middle class sort of suburb of Philadelphia. And I'll never forget when guys were like getting in trouble when we were in our 20s, in the NFL, or like something like that happened to you, right? And, my high school buddies would be like, "What an idiot that guy must be." And I remember thinking, man, I've known you since you were 5. And if someone gave you a few $1 million and everybody knew who you were, I guarantee you'd screw it up. I guarantee it. There's no those books, those Idiot's Guide to Being Young, Rich, and Famous. Like, what I tell people is I believe it's like a scientific experiment that's bound to go wrong a lot. And I'm actually surprised it doesn't go wrong more often. I think they actually do a pretty good job of giving these guys enough support that they don't make. And I look back on it now, and even I made some decisions like any 22-year-old does that I wish I hadn't.
It's life. We're all flawed human beings trying to be better every day, okay? It doesn't matter that we were good at football, right? I mean, hell, you got a Ivy League education and you're calling football games and doing a podcast, man. I mean, it doesn't necessarily fit with the idea of what is and what isn't. We're all the same. In fact, we're probably, as life skills wise, we're probably less likely to do well outside of football than we are with the football component. So people shouldn't be so dumbfounded or surprised when we just absolutely turn into dumpster fires at points in our lives, because we've been raised on this pedestal our whole life and kind of catered to and enabled. And so it shouldn't be such a shock. I know people keep wanting to go to, how would you mess that up? Well, you can't look at it as I messed it up either, because I'm a 47-year-old right now with a family and a wonderful career and everything that I could ever want. So I don't know what you want to measure a success, because I couldn't have a career longer than 5 years in the NFL. Okay, and I allowed that to affect me for as ever long as it did. I'm okay with that version of me that you want to have.
All right, I got 2 more for you that I think are interesting. Number 1, why do you think? I know you said your career was over after 3 games, and that it was because of how you reacted to the adversity. Have you ever thought about why? Like, why you didn't handle the adversity better? Why your career was over after 3 games? Like, what is it about you that made that the case?
Well, I didn't know it was. This is me in hindsight being able to look back at it and go. But at the time, I just was so humiliated at the performance. Just humiliated, okay? And my way to of being defensive and backed into a corner is to fight. And I don't care who's in front of me. It had always worked for me my whole life, because I was talented enough the next week to go out on the football field and shut everybody up, or the basketball court or the baseball diamond. It didn't matter for me. I was so good and better and talented, more talented than everybody else. They just had to shut up. because they were like, oh yeah, he's really good at what he does. He can be an ass, but he's great. Instead, I went out and played the New York Giants the next week, and I threw 4 interceptions. I'd never thrown 4 interceptions in my life. Okay, they ran a Make-A-Wish commercial with me with some terminally ill kids on the big screen in the third quarter, and it got booed. And I know they were booing me, not the kids, but still, that's the point of where we were. Where just 2 weeks ago, I was 2-0, and everybody was calling me the savior, and Pepsi had just come in and given me a huge 4-year Pepsi contract. I mean, it was unbelievable to see the backslide of that hill just boom, drop off the face of the earth. It's like the Tetons in Jackson Hole. It was absurd. But I always assumed it didn't matter, right? It didn't matter if I got the chance. I was talented enough that I was going to be great. It was just a matter of time. Year 2, I blow my labrum out. I missed the entire second year. That's the year where the guys make the jump, right? Year 2, you make the jump, you understand. Year 3, I win the job. Right, I had surgery. I didn't think I was going to come back from it. I beat out Jim Harbaugh. I beat out Eric Kramer. I'm the starting quarterback for the Chargers to start the third year. We go 0-2 to start. We lead. We take the lead and have the lead on the last possession in both games, and our defense gives up scores. And they benched me in week 2, and I lost it. The new head coach and I did not see eye to eye. And I was also a rageaholic at the time, right? Everything anybody said or did, I was always worried about. What you thought of me was so much of my business. And so it just escalated and escalated and escalated. So that's the reason why it didn't work. It was because of me and my lack of life skills and ability to cope with failure. And you know what? When I was struggling, not being vulnerable and transparent enough to ask for help. Instead, saying it was you, not me, surrounding myself with yes men telling me that I was right, that I was the victim, and no one was actually showing me the mirror. The people that were showing me the mirror, I pushed out of my life. And so it was deserving. It's just flat out deserving on my part.
And then the last question, what was the breakthrough, Ryan? Because it seemed like you had a couple breakthroughs and then there'd be an incident or whatever when you were coaching. What was, like, how did you finally get to the other side?
Well, that's the thing about living in the public eye. Like, you know, people write stories and do things, and everybody's like, oh, things seem to be going good. But I look back at the times where people think things were going good, and I was just an absolute shit show, man. I mean, so, you know, I don't buy into that. People going, he's just had all these ups and downs. No, I had a very high up, and then I had a precipitous down until bottom, all right? There wasn't any kind of like this thing. Oh, he coached. His kids did well. His quarterback that he coached was a 6th-round draft pick. Yeah, I was a functioning addict alcoholic, right? There are many of those people that exist out there where you can have a good job and make a lot of money and things look like everything's going good. But no, it was just a precipitous downslide until it hit the very bottom, which was, you know, straight addiction, breaking into people's houses to steal pills, and ultimately ending up in prison for almost 3 years. That wasn't the change either. That's just rock bottom. And I don't even know if it's rock bottom, because rock bottom to me is probably death. That is the only direction that there is. What ultimately changed was a roommate of mine in prison. He was an Iraqi-Afghan war vet, and he was not resolute with being this version of him or how he was judged. He had made a mistake. He had made amends for it. And he looked at me, I think, and I feel one day just had enough of my poor is woe is me attitude, and he just confronted me and said, you don't understand the value that you have, Ryan, not only for the men in here, but when you get out, you have your head buried in the sand. And he suggested we go down to the prison library and help prisoners who didn't know how to read learn how to read. And I've had so many of those come to Jesus talks my whole life, from coaches, mentors, family, and I just, you know, flipped them the bird. I got this. I'm the big, strong football player. So I can't tell you why in that moment I acquiesced, but I maybe because the substance had been out of my system long enough where I did. I went, but I remember still going begrudgingly. I was in this red jumpsuit walking down a prison hallway, like metaphorically kicking rocks like some little petulant child going, this is stupid. This isn't going to help me. Doesn't he know how important I am? And the irony of all that is that the guy in a red jumpsuit in a prison hallway still thinks he's important. And so I walked into this room where there were middle-aged men, in a place where you're supposed to show no vulnerability because it can get you hurt or even killed in some instances. And the guy walked up to me and said, "Hey, Ryan, I never learned how to read. Can you help me?" And in my entire life, growing up in the cowboy culture of Montana, in locker rooms my whole life, I don't think I ever heard another man in my lifetime, on TV, in real life or anything, go, "Hey, I'm really hurting here. Can you help me?" And so if you'd never heard it, how are you supposed to ever do it? Ever. And so that's where it started. Now, you don't know it's happening at the time. If I would have stopped going the next day and nothing would have changed, it's like going to the gym. You don't go to the gym one time and wake up the next day and look like The Rock, right? It's about consistency. It's about showing up. And I did. I started coming back, and in the worst possible place you can imagine, here are these two men going through a very adverse thing who helped each other. Him by asking for help, me by doing it. And so when December 3rd, 2014 came around, when I was allowed to leave prison, I knew that had to be the difference. It had to be about other people, or nothing was going to change for me, period. I was going to end up back in there, or most likely dead. That's the path I was on. And it wasn't like anything was available to me. I walked out. My parents were there to pick me up. No one wanted to hang out with me. I had a credit score of 500. No one wanted to offer me a job. No one wanted to be around me. There wasn't Westwood One or ESPN or NFL Network or PointsBet going, "Hey, Ryan, come work for us." No one wanted anything to do with me. In fact, my hometown newspaper the next morning ran a cartoon that said, "Lock your medicine cabinets up. Ryan Leaf's out." My hometown newspaper.
Wow.
And I was like, this is just what it's going to be the rest of my life. But that hope, there was a little bit of hope in there in what I did, helping people. And then I became the substance abuse counselor for the guy in the TA for the substance abuse counselor. So it ended up being about service to others. That's what changed it, period. I used to think me being serviceable to others was what I did on Saturdays and Sundays. And that's moronic. That's not the truth at all. That's what changed it. And since that day, December, whatever it was, 4th, 2014, until now, all I've tried to make it about is other people. I fall down and fail a bunch when I get selfish in some instances, but I try to make corrections and amends about it. And now it's rooted and based in that. And if I continue to do that, I know most likely I'll wake up tomorrow morning with a clear head, a vision, and a work ethic to get me there. But I also know that my best thinking has taken me to a prison cell. So I have to do the next right thing, period, or nothing's going to change. And so that's the daily reprieve I get. Luckily, I have an unbelievable partner. I have an unbelievable group of people who have supported me over the last 8 years. And to make a long story as short as possible here for you, to your question, was what changed is when I made it about somebody other than myself, period.
Wow. Unbelievable. Check him out on social media at Ryan D. Leaf. Fantastic. You can see why he's a fantastic keynote speaker. Really appreciate the time, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
You bet, Ross. Keep doing your thing, man. It's fun to watch you get to do it. I know how much you love it, and that makes me, I think, enjoy it and love it even more. So keep doing what you're doing.
Man, what a story from Ryan Leaf. I appreciate him being so transparent, so honest about everything. I think that's probably very helpful for a lot of people. I also think for me sometimes, especially like over this past weekend, drinking some Labatt Blue Lights with my friends and family is very helpful. Always enjoy it responsibly, though. It's delicious beer made by Labatt USA in Buffalo, New York.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, the big news from the weekend, the Patriots, they gave running back Ramondre Stevenson a 4-year, $36 million extension.
Right, and I think it's $17 million fully guaranteed. Absolutely thrilled for Ramondre. I am glad these running backs are starting to get life-altering contracts. Now, is it what the receivers are making? Not even close. It's not even close to what left guards are making. But $17 million fully guaranteed, that is just fantastic for Ramondre and his family. And he's been a really good player the first 3 years. I think he's earned this. And the Patriots, it's interesting, with the new regime, they're going out of their way to make sure they kind of take care of their own, which I think the players will appreciate.
And the Broncos, they're hiring former Stanford head coach David Shaw as a personnel executive.
It's interesting to me that Shaw is getting in on the front office side of things. I can see him being a GM. I can see him being a head coach in the NFL. There were a number of years when he was at Stanford that people really were interested in him coming NFL as a head coach. He didn't want to do that. He loved it at Stanford. Obviously, that's no longer the case. So he's sliding in on the executive side. I think it's a really good hire for the Denver Broncos. I also think I'm excited for the Even Money podcast with Fezzik tomorrow. College Draft podcast is already posted for today. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. A lot of weddings, a lot of anniversaries, a lot of birthdays this time of year. I'm not aware of a better gift you can give someone. Myfrontpagestory.com. I also like backofficeschedule.com, humanheadnyc.com, Sporticulture, and Pizza Boy Brewing.